Thank you for listening to the Apocalypse Payload. We are building content for the world of EchoThis at echothis.com. This will help us build out more stories and immersive training for computer forensics, OSINT, and cybersecurity in the future. Thank you. Chapter 7. Containment is a lie. Containment ended the way cheap lies always did, all at once in public and with terrible timing. At 3:12 p.m., a hospital parking garage camera caught a crowd surge so dense the concrete seemed to buckle under it. Barnes only saw the footage because some anonymous saint with bad judgment and excellent instincts mirrored the feed before the system crashed. The clip opened on a line of masked staff trying to hold the lower ramp at Mercy West with rolling gurneys turned sideways like barricades. For 3 seconds, it almost looked organized. Then a woman in a torn intake gown came sprinting out of the stairwell with blood on her mouth and no respect whatsoever for traffic control. She hit the first orderly hard enough to fold him over the hood of a county sedan. The rest of the line broke like wet paper. By the time the clip cut, the crowd wasn't fleeing in one direction anymore. It was separating by instinct. The unbitten trying to escape the bitten trying to get closer, and the people in between discovering there was no category left that meant safe. Barnes paused the frame and let the silence in the safe house fill with its own diagnosis. Ed stood behind him with the rifle slung low and his mask up now, properly sealed across nose and mouth. The mask made his voice duller, but not softer. "That's a hospital," he said. "Technically," Barnes replied. The Mercy West camera feed had dropped into a folder already swollen with evidence. Broadcast captures, body cam fragments, hallway stills, scanner logs, screenshots of neighborhood panic, and the increasingly smug Tor thread that had begun this whole descent into clarity. On the second monitor, FFmpeg still chewed through emergency stream remnants, pulling whatever dying signals Aviary City had left to offer. The machine fans whispered like nervous insects. The city outside no longer sounded like a city. It sounded like a set of incompatible emergencies trying to occupy the same air. Sirens layered over shouting. Engines revved and stalled. Metal struck metal. Somewhere close, too close, somebody was pounding on a door with a rhythm that had lost all pretense of patience. Rainwater still dripped from the morning storm, but now it carried the scent of oil, wet concrete, garbage, overheated brakes, and something sharper underneath that Barnes's brain kept trying not to label as blood. He labeled it anyway. Blood had an honesty institutions lacked. He pulled the parking garage clip into a fresh case folder, hashed it, tagged the source chain, and started extracting stills. Gurney barricade, stairwell emergence, first impact, line break. He named them clinically, because naming them honestly would have required profanity and possibly alcohol. On the main screen, the incident map of Aviary City had begun to rot. Hospitals had been the first hard cluster, then transit-linked sites, then schools and clinic annexes. Now the pins were bleeding outward into apartment blocks, small retail rows, parking decks, intersections, pharmacies, and the kind of municipal nowhere spaces that only became visible once they turned into disaster scenes. Spiderfoot kept feeding him ugly little truths. Maltego kept making those truths hold hands. Containment, in other words, had become a decorative concept. Barnes clicked open the latest scanner transcript cache. Mercy West South parking lost. Repeat, triage tents compromised. Security abandoning East Corridor. Do not route there, do not... Static. He copied the lines into the timeline and added them to the Mercy West cluster. Ed watched him for a moment. "You're still doing evidence tags. I'm trying not to scream. Healthy. Professionally, yes." Ed leaned over and looked at the map. "How bad?" Barnes expanded the city overlay. "How much honesty are you in the mood for?" Ed didn't answer. He didn't need to. Barnes zoomed out. Hospitals are no longer control points. They're amplifiers. Transit corridors feeding them are exposure funnels, Schools are jammed because safe transfer means nothing if the roads are hot and the receiving sites are collapsing. Residential spillover is accelerating. If there is a containment plan, it currently exists in the same space as unicorns and competent bureaucracy. Ed's eyes tracked the screen. So, Barnes said, containment is a lie. He said it softly, but it landed with the force of confession. The safe house seemed to hear him. The inverter gave a small protesting chirp. One of the overhead bulbs flickered twice, then steadied. Somewhere in the building, pipes knocked like old bones. Barnes refreshed the Tor thread. New posts. Of course. The thread had developed a rhythm now. Not frantic, not celebratory, just the measured tone of people watching a machine meet spec. It made Barnes want to put his fist through the monitor, which would have been emotionally satisfying and strategically stupid. Ashmarrow, medical bottlenecks underperforming. Pharaoh _12, triage diversion created useful density. Sableglass, civil self-isolation remains inconsistent. Null harvest, containment theater sufficient, continue observation. Barnes stared at the last line. Containment theater, he said. Ed read it over his shoulder. That's cute. It's obscene. Barnes captured the page, source, timestamps, and user positions. Then he dragged the new posts into Maltego and ran a time delta transform against the latest incident burst. Mercy West, parking collapse, broadcast interruptions, transit suspension expansion, 3 apartment complex distress reports. A district pharmacy raid that might have been panic, might have been need, and in practice amounted to the same thing. The graph snapped tighter. That's impossible, Ed said. Barnes shook his head. No, just efficient. What am I looking at? Barnes highlighted the lines one by one. Ashmarrow posts 3 minutes after Mercy West loses the south parking ramp. Pharaoh _12 comments after the triage diversion notice and before the second ambulance reroute hits the public boards. Null harvest calls containment theater while the city is still broadcasting shelter in place like they believe walls are magical. Ed studied the screen. Observers. Yeah. Close? Close enough to watch, or fed by someone who is. Barnes pushed another transform. Civilian message bursts, volunteer routes, distress keywords. The web thickened again, all those separate voices dragged into one ugly picture by timing. The public warning had not created a unified story. It had created a market. Rumor moved fastest. Then fear. Then guidance from men with no qualifications beyond owning a flashlight and a bad opinion. Official language arrived later, wearing clean verbs and stale confidence. He opened a side pane and started building a drift table. Public message drift, 1500 to 1526, FEMA, shelter in place / report bites / avoid, symptomatic individuals / aggressive and infectious. City health relay, avoid aggressive febrile individuals / maintain distance / await emergency instruction. Transit authority, major route suspension / do not gather at stations. Hospital public notice, emergency departments overwhelmed / do not present unless condition is critical. Local repost cluster, A, stay inside / avoid sick people. Local repost cluster B, riots at hospitals / airborne infection / avoid everyone. Neighborhood board chatter. Hospitals are where it happens / bites confirmed / don't believe the city / don't say zombie / my cousin says guard on River Road. He kept building. That was his curse and his use. While other men heard panic as volume, Barnes heard sequence, delay, mutation, where a sentence lost a noun, where a warning got laundered into something more survivable and therefore more fatal. The FEMA alert had said bites. The city had said aggressive febrile individuals. Transit had said do not gather. Hospitals had said do not come. Neighborhoods had translated all of it into the only honest conclusion available. The state had noticed the fire after the roof collapsed. Ed moved to the shelves and began reorganizing gear with the cold precision of a man who had accepted that a room could remain useful and temporary at the same time. "You're doing the face again," he said through the mask. "That is not useful feedback. It means you're about to mistake analysis for shelter." Barnes looked over. "That is unusually poetic for you." "It's a symptom. That word has really gone out of fashion." Ed checked the filters, then set 2 fresh ones beside the med kit. "Tell me what changed." Barnes rubbed both hands over his face and turned back to the table. "Public warning went out. That's not new. It is if you care about social behavior more than policy." He tapped the screen. Before the alert, the city was misclassifying. After the alert, it's misclassifying louder. The difference matters. How? Because once the government says bite and your local board says airborne and the hospital says don't come here and your cousin says troops are coming, people stop responding to the event and start responding to 5 versions of it at once. Barnes pointed at the graph. That's what they wanted, not just outbreak, explanation, fragmentation. Ed watched the screen in silence. "The warning didn't catch the city up," Barnes said. "It multiplied confusion." That was the midpoint, though Barnes would not have called it that. Just the moment the whole thing tipped from terrible into structurally terrible. The alert had not stabilized reality. It had announced a public phase the private operators were already timing. He opened another live board. A thread titled, "What to Do If They Won't Stop Biting," had 63 replies in 4 minutes and almost no useful information. One man insisted, bleach fixed everything. A woman said, "Do not let paramedics in unless they show ID and can answer your building code phrase." Someone else claimed the infection only spread through hospitals and buses. 2 replies later, another user wrote that their brother had been bitten at home. A moderator locked the thread and replaced it with a pinned post reading, "Wait for verified guidance. Do not spread panic." The comments below it filled instantly with panic. Barnes captured the page, then another, and another. One neighborhood board was now full of door barricade advice from people who had never had to barricade anything except perhaps their feelings. One apartment forum was trading check-in templates and warning each other not to answer shared entry buzzers. A school parent group had become a prayer chain with casualty reporting folded into it. An ex-cop with a radio had started posting clipped situation updates that were mostly confidence, half-truth, and neighborhood myth wrapped together in the tone of a man thrilled that the end of order had finally validated his personality. Barnes preserved all of it. He didn't trust any of it. He absolutely trusted the shape. Panic did not produce clarity. It produced competing realities, each one trying to recruit bodies into its version first. Outside, a vehicle roared past the basement window too fast, braked hard, and sat idling for 10 full seconds. Both men froze. Barnes crossed to the window, low and careful, keeping out of the visible angle. The slice of street he could see was bad with reflections. Wet curb, lower panel of a city van, red hazard blink, runoff carrying wrappers, and dark smears toward a drain. Then a child's voice, high and panicked. "Mom!" A woman's voice over it, hoarse from fear or shouting or both. "Get in the car! Get in the car now!" Then another voice from farther away. "Don't bring him here!" Barnes could not see the speaker. Only shoes, running feet, one pair dragging, one pair quick, another impact against metal. Ed joined him at the edge of the wall, not exposing himself. "What?" "Family, maybe," Barnes whispered. "Trying to move somebody." The child started crying properly now, not upset, but betrayed. Then came the sound that changed the scene from generic fear into something specific and doomed. A man coughing wetly, then making a noise like his own throat had forgotten what language was for. The woman shouted, "Help me!" No one answered. A second later, the van door slammed. Another voice from the block, male, terrified, yelled, "No, no, no, don't put him in." Something hit the side of the vehicle hard enough to ring. Then, glass shattered. Ed had already taken one step back toward the gear. That's our cue to stay generous in theory and indoors in practice. Barnes stood listening 1 second too long, not because he wanted to help, because part of him still needed to count what the warning had failed to do. It had not stopped movement. It had not stopped families from trying to transfer the wrong body to the wrong place. It had only made them more desperate and less coordinated. The engine revved. Tires spun wet. The van fishtailed away. A scream followed it down the block and got smaller. Barnes went back to the desk and typed, "Exterior event. Probable family self-transport attempt / one distressed child / one symptomatic adult / third-party refusal / vehicle departure under duress." Ed glanced over. "You really document like the city might apologize later." "No," Barnes said. "I document because it won't." He pulled more feeds. The police social account posted, "Residents should remain indoors and avoid contact with symptomatic persons. Officers are responding under surge conditions," then deleted it, replaced it 31 seconds later with, "Remain indoors and report emergencies when safe." Barnes preserved both. "That's not drift," he said. "What is it?" Ed asked. "Cowardice with an edit button." He dragged the deleted version into the comparison sheet. The first one had still implied officers were responding to a defined threat. The second restored the usual polite vagueness. Remain indoors. Emergencies. When safe. Institutions loved abstraction when specifics sounded too much like confession. The emergency relay on one station came back just long enough to deliver a new phrase. Do not perform unsupervised aid on unresponsive persons exhibiting fever or recent aggressive behavior. Barnes saved the audio, trimmed the clip, tagged it. No one in government wanted to say the dead, so they kept drawing circles around it and hoping the public would enjoy geometry. He looked at the safe house wall, map, notes, printouts, eastward anomaly corridor, the line of places the city had ignored, then misread, then named too late. The room still offered filtered air, sight lines, controlled entries, evidence continuity. Ed was right. The alert had made the street louder, not safer. But staying now had a cost, too. Not immediate death, something slower and meaner. Future movement degrading by the hour. Roads clogging, apartment blocks sealing, supplies becoming visible, corridors turning into rumor before they turned into roots. He added another note. Each hour stationary increases evidence integrity / decreases later mobility. Ed came back to the desk carrying the 2 go bags and set them down side by side like arguments. "Inventory pass," he said. "Now." "Now?" Barnes sighed. "You are a deeply unreasonable man." "I survive like one." That was fair. Ed pointed to the first bag. "Your carry if we go fast." Barnes opened it. Laptop. Primary SSD. Secondary backup in red pouch. Folded map. Notebook. Power bank. Short cables. Small med kit. Pistol mags. Water. Mask filter. No vanity items. No extra tools. No sentimental weight. The second bag was uglier and more honest. Ed's. Trauma roll. Ammo. Pry bar. Rope. Bolt cutters. Spare filters. 2 flashlights. Water. Bars. Blanket strip. Lighter. Flare. "What died?" Ed asked. Barnes knew what he meant, what had already become shelf-bound, even if they were still in the room. Printer if the power went, bulk food, reference binders, half the archived paper, the heavier Pelican case, the larger trauma kit, the redundancy Barnes had once worshipped like a religion. He looked at the shelves and felt the safehouse shift category again, no longer base, pre-departure evidence vault. "We travel lean," he said. Ed nodded. "Good. We are not leaving yet." "I know. Do you?" Ed looked at him over the top of the mask. "Barnes, the street is full of panic, false guidance, live exposure, and men who think a flashlight makes them command staff. I'm not trying to leave. I'm trying to make sure leaving later isn't impossible." That got under Barnes' ribs because it was true in exactly the way truth always was when Ed said it. Stripped, ugly, not interested in ceremony. The hallway camera flickered. Both men turned at once. For half a second, the image tore and recovered. Empty corridor, dirty tile, water stain on the ceiling, basement stair lip. Then a line of light crossed the far wall. A flashlight. Slow, controlled, not frantic. The beam paused near the basement stairwell, moved off, came back shorter, then vanished. Neither man spoke. Ed crossed to the wall and killed one of the room lights, leaving the workstation glow and the low shelf lamp. Barnes whispered, "Tenant?" Ed said nothing. "Maintenance?" Nothing. "Someone checking power?" Ed still said nothing, which somehow made the silence answer him more efficiently than language would have. The camera showed nothing now, just corridor, just tile, just the knowledge that the corridor had recently contained intent. Barnes logged it. Building interior anomaly. Controlled flashlight sweep outside basement corridor. 2 passes, no visible body. Ed racked the rifle quietly and leaned it within reach, then went back to the desk. "We're still not moving because of a flashlight," Barnes said. "No." "But we're less hidden than we were this morning." "Yes." "Good, wonderful. Love that." Ed tilted his head. "You do your best work, offended." "That is the kindest thing you've ever said to me." The thread updated again. Barnes almost didn't want to click it, which was how he knew he had to. Sable glass, public advisories fragmenting as expected. Ash Marrow, local retention lower than modeled. Pharaoh_12, triage overflow remains useful. Null harvest, public phase established. Barnes leaned back very slowly. There it was. Not an outbreak, not a civic emergency, not people dying in parking decks and stairwells and family vans because systems had failed. A phase. Ed read it over his shoulder. "That's a milestone." "Yes." "For them." "Yes." "That make you angry?" "It is becoming one of my more stable features." Public phase established. The phrase reframed the entire day as rollout logic, public warning, public confusion, local fragmentation, triage density, residential spillover, advisory drift. All of it measured not as tragedy, but as transition. Barnes copied the post into the notes and typed beneath it. "Institutions are finally speaking, because the event no longer needs their silence to function." He stared at the sentence, then left it there. The city outside dipped toward evening without improving. That was one of Aviary City's special talents, wearing dusk not as closure, but as degradation. Reflections got meaner. Sirens spread out. Street sounds sharpened because fewer of them remained innocently human. The basement window turned from gray slit into black mirror cut with emergency color. One low trust board now had users posting apartment numbers and begging for building access. Another had turned into a ledger of which pharmacies had been stripped, which clinics were closed, and which shelters were not taking fever people anymore, as if language could refuse reality by refusing taxonomy. One church group announced soup distribution, then took the post down 8 minutes later. A transit enthusiast forum of all things became one of Barnes's best information sources because the users there were obsessive, unsentimental, and furious when buses deviated from route logic. He learned more from them in 12 minutes than from the city health office in 3 hours. North Transfer dead driver bailed after passenger attack medical detour. Backing into regular lines, somebody turned Station C into triage overflow, and now no one can clear it. He preserved everything. Ed sat on the crate by the shelf, mask still on, cleaning the flashlight lens with the ritual calm of a man performing maintenance on his own nerves. "You've been at that lens 6 times, Barnes said. "It keeps being dirty." "That feels metaphorical." "It's not." They let the room hum for a moment. The inverter status remained decent, battery reserves holding, Air still filtered, camera still live, basement still tactically correct. But spiritually, that was different. The safe house had begun to feel like a room they were preserving because the next room was worse, not because this one still believed in the future. Barnes saved another backup and mirrored the live case folder again. The habit no longer felt compulsive. It felt like the only form of prayer available to technicians. At 18:04, the local block speaker came alive outside with a mangled municipal advisory. Shelter in place. Do not admit symptomatic persons to shared residences. Building coordinators should secure. Feedback tore the sentence in half. Then a different voice shouted over the loudspeaker from somewhere street level, not official at all. You can't leave them outside. A second voice answered with such raw panic, Barnes couldn't parse the words. Then pounding, then a crash, then running feet. The loudspeaker kept hissing because systems, unlike people, could continue after losing the plot entirely. Ed looked toward the ceiling. Apartment countries. You called that. I dislike being right in neighborhoods. Another message came through on a private volunteer board. Barnes had been scraping all day. Need gauze/masks, /someone with a truck/family of 4, locked out of 18th Tower, because one is febrile and security says no entry. 2 replies below, it argued whether refusing them was cruel or correct. A third asked whether febrile meant bitten. A fourth accused the original poster of spreading panic. Barnes saved the thread. That was the outbreak now, not just bodies and bites and reanimation lurking one euphemism farther down the road, but communities forced to improvise moral law faster than they could absorb evidence. He clicked the map again. The red spread had thickened around medical corridors and bloomed outward in ugly petals. Residential incidents were no longer secondary. They were the next substrate. Every point he added made later movement feel less like departure and more like threading a needle through a living wound. Ed came over again. Say it. Barnes looked up. What? The part you've been avoiding. He glanced at the bags, at the map, at the flashlight anomaly entry, at the public phase post, at the family van scene. He still couldn't stop hearing. Then he said it. Every hour we remain here improves evidence continuity and worsens our odds later. Ed nodded once. No triumph in it, no satisfaction, just the acceptance of another ugly number entering the room. But we're still right to stay, Barnes added. For now, Ed said. For now, Barnes echoed. The phrase had become unbearable in its usefulness. He went back to the workstation and built one final note block before full dark. State of the city, late afternoon. Official warning public, trust broken. Hospitals, amplifying rather than containing. Transit corridors, now exposure funnels. Schools and clinics collapsing into spillover sites. Residential self-barricading increasing. Building-level exclusion behavior emerging. Observer thread treating public confusion as milestone. Safe house tactically viable/anonymity. Degraded. Future movement worsening by the hour he printed it. The printer took too long and sounded offended. When the page came out, he pinned it beneath the earlier sheet from the dead emergency waveform. Internal recognition delayed public recognition. Physical proof eliminated ordinary explanations. Containment is a lie. He stood there looking at the wall while the tape settled. Behind him, the city kept choosing worse versions of itself in public. When he finally sat back down, the safe house felt both more necessary and less sustainable than it had that morning. That was the continuity he'd been resisting all day. The room had not failed. The city around it had become too fluid for any room to remain permanent. Ed handed him a bottle of water. Barnes took it, drank, and discovered he had been operating one full layer below hydration for hours. Any chance the world develops mercy before nightfall? He asked. Ed considered the question with the seriousness it did not deserve. No. Good. Hate. False hope. Outside, a siren rose, staggered, and died. Another took its place from farther east. Barnes looked at the map on the wall, the eastward anomaly corridor still pinned there, like a threat that had learned patience. The instinct was there now under everything else. Not yet root, not yet action, but directional gravity. East held the answers. East held the machinery. East held the reason the thread sounded like lab notes wearing hacker gloves. But East could wait one little while longer. The basement still had air, still had storage, still had eyes, still had two men in it who understood the difference between staying because a place was safe and staying because the world outside was not yet worth the cost. He refreshed the thread one last time before darkness settled fully over the block. No new posts. That somehow made it worse, because the people behind it did not need to narrate anymore. The city was now performing their thesis in public. Barnes shut down one of the secondary feeds to save power and listened to the safehouse hum. The building around them had grown quieter in the wrong way, not calm, held. The kind of silence produced when too many doors were locked at once and too many people were trying to decide whether compassion still counted as a survival skill. "You still think we hold tonight?" he said. Ed didn't look up from the rifle check. "Yes? Even with the corridor light?" "Yes. Even with building politics starting to hatch?" "Yes. Even with Mercy West turning into a teeth-powered amplifier?" Ed glanced at him. "The street didn't improve just because you got more evidence." Barnes let out a tired breath that almost qualified as laughter. "There's the poetry again. Watch it." He watched the incident map for another 10 minutes, long enough to hate what it was becoming and not long enough to understand all of it. Then he saved everything again. Because that was what he did when a city moved from warning into failure and the world insisted on using human beings as transmission surfaces for both infection and meaning. The formal emergency had begun. The operational collapse had begun with it. And somewhere beneath the sirens, rumor, dead broadcasts, apartment barricades, and freighted silence of a city learning to fear doors, Barnes could feel the next truth arriving. Not yet movement, not yet escape. Just the hardening knowledge that the outbreak was now outrunning both medicine and messaging, and that every hour spent preserving the record improved the record while making the road worse. The safe house remained the right hold. It just no longer felt like a future.